Looking back at 2011, nobody could have predicted that a movie about robot boxing would end up having this kind of staying power. Real Steel was supposed to be just another forgettable action flick with a gimmick premise, but here we are well over a decade later and people are still obsessively rewatching it on streaming platforms and begging for a continuation. The whole thing is kind of surreal when you think about it, because the film industry is brutal about moving on from projects that don't immediately spawn franchises, yet this one managed to carve out this weird second life that just keeps getting stronger. What really separates Real Steel from other failed franchise starters is that it actually made serious money at the box office. We're talking over 300 million worldwide against a budget of around 110 million, which is a legitimate hit by any measure. The audience reception was even more telling because it landed an A on CinemaScore, which basically means regular moviegoers absolutely loved what they were watching, even if some critics were lukewarm about it. That disconnect between critical reception and audience enthusiasm is actually a hallmark of future cult classics, and this movie fits that pattern perfectly. The technical achievement here deserves way more credit than it usually gets. Sean Levy and the visual effects team at Legacy Effects didn't just rely on CGI to create. The cast that Levy assembled is genuinely stacked when you look at where everyone ended up. Hugh Jackman is obviously the anchor as Charlie Kenton, this washed-up former boxer turned desperate robot fight promoter who's basically hitting rock bottom when the story starts. Dakota Goyo plays his estranged son Max, and the kid brings this infectious energy that could have easily been annoying, but instead becomes the emotional center of everything. Then you've got Evangeline Lilly as Bailey, who runs the gym where Charlie used to train, Anthony Mackie as Finn the smooth-talking promoter, Kevin Durant as the intimidating Ricky, and Hope Davis in a smaller role. Mackie in particular is so charismatic in his scenes that you kind of want an entire spin-off just following his character through the underground betting circuits because he clearly has stories to tell. Here's where the movie gets interesting from a storytelling perspective. On the surface, it's Rocky meets robots, which is a perfectly serviceable premise, but what makes it work is how grounded everything feels despite the sci-fi trappings. This isn't about saving the world or preventing some apocalyptic event. It's just about a guy trying to pay his debts and reconnect with a kid he abandoned. The robots are essentially the vehicle for exploring that broken. There's this theory that's been floating around the fan community for years about whether Adam actually has some form of consciousness or if he's just a really well-programmed sparring bot. Throughout the movie, there are these subtle moments where he seems to react to things in ways that feel almost aware, like when he appears to study his own reflection or moves in patterns that suggest he's learning beyond his basic programming. The original script deliberately leaves this ambiguous, which is actually a brilliant move, because it adds this layer of mystery without requiring the film to commit to a hard science fiction explanation. If you watch closely during the final fight with Zeus, Adam takes an absolutely absurd amount of punishment and keeps adapting his fighting style in ways that seem almost intuitive rather than computational. It raises this question about whether we're watching the emergence of something that could be called sentience, or if we're just projecting human qualities onto a sophisticated machine. Sean Levy has talked about how he and executive producer Steven Spielberg wanted to keep that question open-ended in the first film because the magic of the story depends partly on that uncertainty. The moment you definitively answer whether Adam is self-aware or not, you lose some of that emotional ambiguity that makes the relationship between Max and the robot so compelling. A sequel could potentially explore this theme more directly by having Charlie track down whoever originally designed Adam and discovering that there was something experimental about his construction that wasn't supposed to work the way it did. That would tie into our current real-world conversations about artificial intelligence and machine learning in a way that feels genuinely relevant rather than just being generic sci-fi speculation. The streaming era has been absolutely crucial to keeping this movie alive. Every time Real Steel drops on a new platform, it immediately shoots to the top of the most watched charts, which is pretty remarkable for a film that's been out this long. That constant rediscovery by new audiences is exactly what convinced Disney to greenlight development of a series for Disney Plus back in 2022. For fans who had been waiting years for any kind of follow-up, that announcement felt like validation that the studio finally recognized what they had. The initial momentum seemed really really promising, with Sean Levy giving interviews in early 2024 about how they had locked down writers and were actively working on scripts to expand the universe. The frustrating reality right now is that things seem to have stalled out again. We're in this weird limbo where everyone involved keeps expressing enthusiasm about returning to the world, but concrete production updates have gone completely silent. Levy himself has been pretty candid about his uncertainty, even joking that he expects to be an old man still getting asked about the sequel by fans. He recently admitted that he wishes he felt more optimistic about it actually happening than he currently does, which is honestly a gut punch for anyone who considers this their comfort watch movie. The disconnect is wild because you have a property that's more popular now than when it was in theaters, a proven audience that shows up every time it's available to stream, and a creative team that wants to make it happen, yet the actual corporate machinery is moving at a glacial pace. Part of what makes the potential for a sequel so exciting is the built-in time jump opportunity. Dakota Goyo, who played 11-year-old Max in the original, is now 26, which is perfect timing for a legacy sequel where he takes over as the lead. You could easily set a story 15 years after the first film, with Max now managing his own stable of fighting robots, while Charlie transitions into more of a mentor role. That kind of generational shift would mirror what we've seen work in other franchises, while also allowing the technology in the universe to evolve in ways that reflect our real-world advances in AI and robotics. The bots in the original already looked impressive, but imagine what they could do with current motion capture and machine learning concepts integrated into the fighting mechanics. One of the most intriguing ideas that's been circulating involves bringing Ryan Reynolds into the franchise as an antagonist. Given that Reynolds has worked with both Levy and Jackman on their recent superhero collaborations, there's obvious chemistry there that could translate perfectly into an adversarial dynamic. The pitch is apparently to cast Reynolds not as a friendly rival, but as a full-blown corporate villain, someone who represents the high-tech elite side of robot boxing as opposed to Charlie's blue-collar scrapper mentality. That kind of class warfare angle would give the story teeth beyond just another underdog sports narrative, especially if you contrast the underground dirt pit fighting from the first movie with some sterile corporate arena where everything is controlled and sanitized. The enthusiasm from the original cast about returning isn't just lip service either. Anthony Mackie has been extremely vocal about staying connected to the production, and he's even pitched his own vision for how the franchise could expand into something with the scope of the Fast and Furious series. That makes sense, considering his character Finn operates in those shadowy gambling and underground fight circuits where there's tons of unexplored world-building potential. Evangeline Lilly has talked about how much the movie means to her personally, and apparently she's even drafted alternative story ideas when she felt the scripts were hitting creative walls. Having actors that invested in maintaining the narrative integrity of their characters is rare, and it speaks to why the first film connected with people on an emotional level that went beyond the spectacle. If a series does eventually materialize on Disney+, it could serve as the perfect testing ground before committing to a massive theatrical sequel. The long-form storytelling format would allow for deeper exploration of the robot boxing world and all the mythology that the movie only hinted at. One of the biggest mysteries that Levy and Spielberg have reportedly discussed is the true origin of Adam, and why a supposedly basic sparring bot was built with such an incredible capacity to absorb damage and learn from combat situations. Was he part of some experimental program that got abandoned? Did his original designer intentionally give him capabilities that weren't supposed to exist in that class of robot? Those questions could sustain an entire season of television while building toward a theatrical conclusion. The concept of Adam potentially having consciousness is really where this franchise could evolve into something genuinely groundbreaking rather than just a feel-good sports drama. Throughout the original, there are these fleeting moments where it seems like he's processing information in ways that go beyond programming, almost like he's developing preferences or recognizing patterns that weren't explicitly coded into him. A sequel could dive into the aftermath of his legendary final battle and explore what it means if a machine actually crosses that threshold into self-awareness. If Charlie were to track down the person who originally built Adam, it could reveal a backstory that blurs the line between tool and being in a way that resonates with everything happening in contemporary AI development. This is where the movie could transition from pure sports entertainment into legitimate science fiction territory without losing the human emotional core that made the first one work. You could explore themes of autonomy and rights for artificial intelligence, essentially having Adam fight for his own existence as a thinking entity rather than just property. That kind of philosophical angle would elevate the material significantly significantly while still maintaining the underdog narrative structure that audiences responded to originally. The key would be handling it with the same restraint and ambiguity that Levy used in the first film rather than getting too heavy-handed with the messaging. The reason Levy and the team have been so selective about which script to greenlight is because they recognize how easy it would be to mess this up. They've apparently reviewed versions that go full hard science fiction and versions that stay purely grounded in the sports drama framework, but they're holding out for something that captures the same emotional weight as the first movie. Levy has been very clear that he left the question of Adam's potential sentience deliberately open-ended because it added magic to the experience, and any explanation they provide in a sequel needs to be just as compelling as the mystery itself. He said he'll only direct if the project meets their standards because nobody wants to tarnish what they built in 2011. What really makes Real Steel resonate is that it taps into this specific type of blue-collar science fiction that we don't see much anymore. Most sci-fi is either apocalyptic or cosmic in scale, but this is just about regular people trying to survive in a world where technology has made their traditional skills obsolete. Charlie used to be a boxer, but that career doesn't exist anymore, so he's scrambling to make a living in this new economy by managing robots instead. That's an incredibly relatable premise, even if the specifics involve 8-foot-tall fighting machines. The grit and practical effects give everything a tactile reality that grounds even the more outlandish moments, which is exactly the secret sauce that needs to carry over into any continuation. The groundwork for a legitimate comeback is absolutely there, even if the timeline keeps getting pushed back by other projects. You have a fan base that's only grown larger thanks to streaming accessibility, a director who's currently at the peak of his Hollywood influence, and star power in Jackman and potentially Reynolds that could draw massive audiences. The potential for a series to test audience appetite before going all in on a theatrical sequel is a smart strategic move that could give us long-form character development and a high-budget finale. Even if it takes several more years, the world of robot boxing clearly isn't finished, and the story of Adam is just waiting for the right creative alignment to come back. While we sit here waiting for official announcements, the community keeps finding new details to analyze and debate. Whether it's the design hierarchy of different robot classes or the tactical evolution Adam shows throughout his fights, there's so much texture in the world building that remains unexplored. We need to see what the professional robot boxing league looks like a decade and a half later, and how the technology has advanced, because if Adam was considered outdated back then, he'd be a complete relic now. The potential for a legacy sequel where Max is the veteran manager and Charlie watches from the sidelines is too narratively rich to ignore, and hopefully the people making these decisions realize they're sitting on a property with genuine franchise potential before too much more time passes. The dream scenario of getting Jackman back in that world alongside a pile of possibly sentient scrap metal remains alive, even if the path forward is frustratingly unclear at the moment.